Welcome, everyone, to Ohio Unsolved. I'm your host, Matthew, and today's episode is an interesting one. David Berkowitz, the son of Sam killer. But before we get into the episode, just a quick reminder that every episode is now available ad-free on Patreon, accessible by all 3 tiers. But for now, let's just get into the episode. Everyone sit back, make sure to lock your doors and windows, and get ready for Ohio Unsolved. David Richard Berkowitz, also known as the son of Sam and the .44 caliber killer, is a serial killer who pled guilty to 8 shootings that began in New York City on July 29, 1976. Berkowitz grew up in New York City and served in the United States Army. Using a .44 special caliber Bulldog revolver, he killed 6 people and wounded 7 others by July 1977. Terrorizing New Yorkers. Berkowitz eluded the biggest police manhunt in the city's history while leaving letters that mocked the police and promised further crimes, which were highly publicized by the press. Berkowitz was arrested on August 10, 1977, and subsequently indicted for 8 shootings. He confessed to all of them and initially claimed to have been obeying the orders of a demon manifested in the form of a black dog belonging to his neighbor, Sam. After being found mentally competent to stand trial, he pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. He subsequently admitted that the dog and devil story was a hoax. In police investigations, he was also implicated in many unsolved arsons in the city. Intense media coverage of the case lent a kind of celebrity status to Berkowitz, which many observers noted that he seemed to enjoy. The New York State Legislature enacted new statutes, known popularly as Son of Sam laws, designed to keep criminals from financially profiting from the publicity created by their crimes. The statutes have remained in New York despite various legal challenges, and similar laws have been enacted in several other states. During the mid-1990s, Berkowitz, by then professing to be a converted evangelical Christian, amended his confession to claim that he had been a member of a violent satanic cult that orchestrated the incidents as ritual murder. A new investigation of the murders began in 1996, but was suspended indefinitely after inconclusive findings. David Berkowitz was born Richard David Falco on June 1, 1953 in Brooklyn, New York. Within a few days of his birth, his biological mother, Elizabeth Broder, gave the child away. Elizabeth had grown up as part of an impoverished family, and she was working as a waitress. In 1936, she had married Tony Falco, an Italian-American. After a marriage of less than 4 years, Falco left her for another woman. Berkowitz's biological father, Joseph Kleinman, was a married businessman who, like Berkowitz's mother, was Jewish. The infant Richard was adopted by Pearl and Nathan Berkowitz of the Bronx. The couple were Jewish hardware store retailers of modest means and childless in middle age. They reversed the order of the boy's first and middle names and gave him their own last name, raising the young David Richard Berkowitz as their only child. Berkowitz had a bar mitzvah and was frequently bullied for being Jewish. Journalist John Vincent Sanders wrote that Berkowitz's childhood was somewhat troubled. Although of above average intelligence, he lost interest in his education at an early age and became infatuated with petty larceny and starting fires. He suffered head injuries as a child. Neighbors and relatives would recall him as difficult, spoiled, and a bully. His adoptive parents consulted at least one psychotherapist due to his misconduct, but his misbehavior never resulted in a legal intervention or serious mention in his school records. He attended public school number 123 and public school number 77. Berkowitz's adoptive mother died of breast cancer when he was 14 years old, and his home life became strained in later years, particularly because he disliked his adopted father's second wife. Berkowitz lived with his father while attending Christopher Columbus High School and college in a 4.5-room apartment in Co-op City from 1967 to 1971. In 1971, at age 17, Berkowitz joined the United States Army and served at Fort Knox in the U.S. with an infantry division in South Korea. After an honorable discharge in June 1974, he located his birth mother, Betty. After a few visits, she disclosed the details of his birth. The news greatly disturbed him, and he was particularly distraught by the array of reluctant father figures. Forensic anthropologist Elliot Layton described Berkowitz's discovery of his birth details as the primary crisis of his life, a revelation that shattered his sense of identity. His communication with his birth mother later lapsed, but for a time he remained in communication with his adoptive sister, Rosalind. Berkowitz attended Brock's Community College for 1 year, enrolling in the spring of 1975. In 1976, he went to work as a driver for the Co-op City Taxi Company. He subsequently had several non-professional jobs, and at the time of his arrest was working as a letter sorter for the United States Postal Service. During the mid-1970s, Berkowitz began committing violent crimes. He messed up his first attempt at murder using a knife, then switched to a handgun and began a lengthy crime spree throughout the New York boroughs of the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens, seeking young female victims. All but one of these crime scenes involved 2 victims. He infamously committed some of his attacks while the women sat with boyfriends in parked cars. Berkowitz exhibited an enduring enjoyment of his activities, often returning to the scenes of his crimes. He claimed that when he was 22 years old, he committed his first attack on Christmas Eve 1975, when he used a hunting knife to stab 2 women in Co-op City. The first alleged victim, a Hispanic woman, was never identified by the police. The second was 15-year-old Michelle Foreman, a sophomore at Truman High School, whom he stabbed 6 times on a bridge near Drescher Loop, and whose injuries were serious enough for her to be hospitalized for a week. Berkowitz was not suspected of these crimes, and soon afterwards he relocated to an apartment in Yonkers. The first shooting, attributed to Berkowitz, occurred in the Pelham Bay neighborhood of the Bronx at about 1:10 a.m. on July 29, 1976. Donna Loria, an emergency medical technician, and her friend Jody Valenti, a nurse, were sitting in Valenti's double-parked Oldsmobile, discussing their evening at Peach Trees, a New Rochelle discotheque. Loria opened the car door to leave and noticed a man quickly approaching. Startled and angered by the man's sudden appearance, she shouted, "Now what is this?" The man produced a gun from the paper bag that he carried and crouched. Bracing one elbow on his knee, he aimed his weapon with both hands and fired. Loria was struck by one bullet that killed her instantly. Valenti was shot in her thigh, and a third bullet missed both women. The shooter turned and walked away quickly. Valenti survived her injury and said that she did not recognize the killer. She described him as a white male in his 30s with a fair complexion, about 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighing about 200 pounds. His hair was short, dark, and curly in a mod style. This description was repeated by Loria's father, who claimed to have seen a similar man sitting in a yellow compact car parked nearby. Neighbors gave corroborating reports to police that an unfamiliar yellow compact car had been cruising the area for hours before the shooting. Years later, in 1993, an imprisoned Berkowitz admitted in an interview with journalist Maury Terry that he had shot Loria and Valenti. On October 23, 1976, a similar shooting occurred in a secluded residential area of Flushing, Queens, next to Bone Park. Carl Denario, a Citibank security guard, and Rosemary Keenan, a Queens college student, were sitting in Keenan's parked car when the windows suddenly shattered. "I felt the car exploded," Denario later said. Keenan quickly started the car and sped away for help. The panicked couple did not realize that someone had been shooting at them, even though Denario was bleeding from a bullet wound to his head. Keenan had only superficial injuries from the broken glass, but Denario eventually needed a metal plate to replace a portion of his skull. Neither victim saw their attacker. The police determined that the bullets embedded in Keenan's car were .44 caliber, but they were so deformed that they thought it was unlikely that they could ever be linked to a particular weapon. Because Denario had shoulder-length hair, police later speculated that the shooter had mistaken him for a woman. Keenan's father was a 20-year veteran of the police department of the NYPD, causing an intense investigation. As with the Loria Valenti shooting, however, there seemed not to be any tangible motive for the shooting. Police made little progress with the case. Many details of the Denario Keenan shooting were very similar to the Loria Valenti case, but police did not initially associate them, partly because the shootings occurred in different boroughs and were being investigated by different police precincts. High school students Donna DeMasi and Joanne Lamino walked home from a movie shortly after midnight on November 27, 1976. They were chatting on the porch of Lamino's home in Floral Park when a young man dressed in military fatigues approached them and began to ask directions. In a high-pitched voice, he said, "Can you tell me how to get?" but then quickly produced a revolver. He shot each of the victims once, and as they fell to the ground injured, he fired several more times, striking the house before running away. A neighbor heard the gunshots, rushed out of his house, and saw a blond man run past, gripping a pistol in his left hand. DeMasi had been shot in the neck, but the wound was not life-threatening. Lamino was hit in the back and hospitalized in serious condition. She was ultimately rendered paraplegic. At about 12:40 a.m. on January 30th, 1977, Secretary Christine Freund and her fiancé bartender John Deal were sitting in Deal's car near the Forest Hills LIRR station in Queens, preparing to drive to a dance hall after having seen the movie Rocky. 3 gunshots penetrated the car. In a panic, Deal drove away for help. He sustained minor superficial injuries, but Freund was shot twice and died several hours later at the hospital. Neither victim had seen their attacker. Police made the first public acknowledgement that the Freund-Deal shooting was similar to earlier incidents, and that the crimes might be connected. All of the victims had been struck with a .44 caliber bullet, and the shooting seemed to target young women with long, dark hair. NYPD Sergeant Richard Cullen stated that police were leaning towards a connection in all of these cases. Composite sketches were released of the black-haired Loria Valenti suspect and the blonde Lamino Damasi suspect. And Conlon noted that police were looking for multiple suspects, not just one. At about 7:30 p.m. on March 8, 1977, Columbia University student Virginia, and I'm going to butcher this name, Voskerchichin, was walking home from school when she was confronted by an armed man. She lived about a block from where Freund had been shot. In a desperate move to defend herself, Virginia lifted her textbooks between her and her killer, but the makeshift shield was penetrated. The bullet struck her head and ultimately killed her. In a March 10, 1977 press conference, NYPD officials and Mayor Abraham Beam declared that the same .44 caliber Bulldog revolver had fired the shots that killed Loria and Virginia. Official documents were later brought to the public eye, revealing that while police strongly suspected that the same .44 caliber pistol had been used in the shootings, the evidence was actually inconclusive. The crimes were discussed by the local media virtually every day. Circulation increased dramatically for the New York Post and the Daily News, tabloid newspapers with graphic crime reporting and commentary. Foreign media featured many of the reports as well, including front-page articles of newspapers such as the Vatican's and the Hebrew newspaper Maariv. At about 3 a.m. on April 17, 1977, Alexander Esu, a tow truck operator, and Valentina Sorini, a Lehman College student and an aspiring actress and model, were sitting in a car belonging to Esu's brother on the Hutchinson River Parkway service road in the Bronx, about a block away from Sorini's home and only a few blocks away from the scene of the Loria Valenti shooting. A resident of a nearby building heard 4 shots and called the police. Sorini, who was sitting on the driver's seat, was shot once and Esu twice, both in the head. Sorini died at the scene, and Esu died in the hospital several hours later without being able to describe his attacker. Police said that the weapon used for the crime was the same as the one which they had suspected in the earlier shootings. In 1993, Berkowitz confirmed that he was the shooter. Police discovered a handwritten letter near the bodies of Esu and Sorini, written mostly in block capitals with a few lowercase letters, and addressed to NYPD Captain Joseph Borelli. With this letter, Berkowitz identified himself as Son of Sam. For the first time, the press had previously dubbed the killer the .44 caliber killer because of his weapon of choice. The letter was initially withheld from the public, but some of its contents were revealed to the press, and the name Son of Sam quickly replaced the old name. The letter expressed a killer's determination to continue his work and taunted police for their fruitless efforts to capture him. In full, with misspellings intact, the letter read, "I am deeply hurt by your calling me a women hater. I am not, but I am a monster. I am the son of Sam. I am a little brat. When Father Sam gets drunk, he gets mean. He beats his family. Sometimes he ties me up to the back of the house. Other times he locks me in the garage. Sam loves to drink blood. Go out and kill, commands Father Sam. Behind our house some rest. Mostly young, raped and slaughtered, their blood drained. Just bones now. Papa Sam keeps me locked in the attic too. I can't get out, but I look out the attic window and watch the world go by. I feel like an outsider. I am on a different wavelength than everybody else. Programmed to kill. However, to stop me, you must kill me. Attention all police. Shoot me first. Shoot to kill or else. Keep out of my way or you will die. Papa Sam is old now. He needs some blood to preserve his youth. He has had too many heart attacks. Too many heart attacks. Ugh. Me hoot, it hurts, sonny boy. I miss my pretty princess most of all. She's resting in Our Lady's house, but I'll see her soon. I am the monster, Beelzebub, the chubby behemoth. I love to hunt, prowling the streets looking for fair game, tasty meat. The women of Queens are the prettiest of all. I must be the water they drink. I live for the hunt, my life, blood for Papa. Mr. Borelli, sir, I don't want to kill anyone, no sir, no more, but I must. Honor thy father. I want to make love to the world. I love people. I don't belong on earth. Return me to Yahoos. To the people of Queens, I love you. And I want to wish all of you a happy Easter. May God bless you in this life and in the next, and for now I say goodbye and good night. Police, let me haunt you with these words. I'll be back. I'll be back. To be interpreted as bang, 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 bang. Ah, yours in murder, Mr. Monster. At the time, police speculated that the letter writer might be familiar with Scottish English. The phrase, "Me hoot, it hurts, sonny boy," was taken as a Scottish accented version of "My heart, it hurts, sonny boy." The police also hypothesized that the shooter blamed a dark-haired nurse for his father's death due to the "too many heart attacks" phrase, and the fact that Loria was a medical technician and Valenti was studying to be a nurse. The killer's unusual attitude towards the police and the media received widespread scrutiny. Psychologists observed that many serial killers gain gratification by eluding pursuers and observers. The feeling of control over media, law enforcement, and even entire populations provides a source of social power for them. After consulting with several psychiatrists, police released a psychological profile on their suspect on May 26, 1977. He was described as neurotic, who probably had paranoid schizophrenia and believed himself to be a victim of demonic possession. On May 30th, 1977, Daily News columnist Jimmy Breslin received a handwritten letter from someone who claimed to be the .44 caliber killer. The letter was postmarked early that same day in Englewood, New Jersey. On the reverse side of the envelope, neatly hand-printed in 4 precisely centered lines, were the words, "Blood and family, darkness and death, absolute depravity." The letter inside read, "Hello from the gutters of NYC, which are filled with dog manure, vomit, stale wine, urine, and blood. Hello from the sewers of NYC, which swallow up these delicacies when they are washed away by the sweeper trucks. Hello from the cracks in the sidewalks of NYC, and from the ants that dwell in these cracks, and feed in the dried blood of the dead that has settled into the cracks. JB, I'm just dropping you a line to let you know that I appreciate your interest in those recent and horrendous .44 caliber killings. I also want to tell you that I read your column daily, and I find it quite informative. Tell me, Jim, what will you have for July 29th? You can forget about me if you like, because I don't care for publicity. However, you must not forget Donna Loria, and you cannot let the people forget her either. She was a very, very sweet girl, but Sam's a thirsty lad, and he won't let me stop killing until he gets his fill of blood. Mr. Breslin, sir, don't think that because you haven't heard from me for a while that I went to sleep. No, rather, I am still here, like a spirit roaming the night, thirsty, hungry, seldom stopping to rest, anxious to please Sam. I love my work. Now the void has been filled. Perhaps we shall meet face to face someday, or perhaps I will be blown away by cops with smoking 38s. Whatever, if I shall be fortunate enough to meet you, I will tell you all about Sam if you like, and I will introduce you to him. His name is Sam the Terrible. Not knowing what the future holds, I shall say farewell, and I will see you at the next job. Or should I say, you will see my handiwork at the next job. Remember, Miss Loria, thank you. In their blood and from the gutter, Sam's creation, 44 caliber, here are some names to help you along. Forward them to the inspector for use by NCIC, the Duke of Death, the Wicked King Wicker, the 22 Disciples of Hell, John Wheaties, rapist and suffocator of young girls. P.S. Please inform all the detectives working the slain to remain. P.S. J.B. Please inform all the detectives working the case that I wish them the best of luck. Keep 'em digging, drive on, think positive, get off your butts, knock on coffins, etc. Upon my capture, I promise to buy all the guys working the case a new pair of shoes if I can get up the money. Son of Sam. Underneath the Son of Sam was a logo or a sketch that combined several symbols. The writer's question, "What will you have for July 29th?" was considered an ominous threat. July 29th would be the anniversary of the Loria Valenti shooting. Breslin notified police, who thought that the letter was probably from someone with knowledge of the shootings. The Breslin letter was sophisticated in its wording and presentation, especially when compared to the crudely written first letter, and police suspected that it might have been created in an art studio or similar professional location by someone with expertise in printing, calligraphy, or graphic design. The unusual writing caused the police to speculate that the killer was a comic book letterer, and they asked staff members of DC Comics whether they recognized the lettering. The Wicker King Wicker reference caused police to arrange a private screening of The Wicker Man, a 1973 horror movie. The Daily News published the letter a week later, after agreeing with police to withhold portions of the text, and Breslin urged the killer to surrender. The dramatic article made that day's paper the highest-selling edition of the Daily News to date. More than 1.1 million copies were sold. Police received thousands of tips based on references in the publicized portions of the letter, all of which proved useless. As all of the shooting victims to date had long dark hair, thousands of women in New York City acquired short cuts or brightly colored dyes, and beauty supply stores had trouble meeting the demand for wigs. On June 26, 1977, Salvatore Lupo, a mechanic's helper, and Judy Placido, a recent high school graduate, had left the Elfa's discotheque in Bayside, Queens, and were sitting in Lupo's parked car at about 3 a.m. when 3 gunshots blasted through the vehicle. Lupo was wounded in the right forearm, while Placido was shot in the right temple, shoulder, and back of the neck. Both victims survived their injuries. Lupo told the police that they had been discussing the Son of Sam case only moments before the shooting. Neither Lupo nor Placido had seen their attacker, but 2 witnesses reported a tall, dark-haired man in a leisure suit fleeing from the area. One claimed to see him leave in a car and even supplied a partial license plate number. With the first anniversary of the initial .44 caliber shootings approaching, police established a sizable dragnet that emphasized past hunting grounds in Queens and the Bronx. However, the next and final shooting occurred in Brooklyn. Early on July 31st, 1977, Secretary Stacy Moskowitz and clothing salesman Robert Valenti, both 20, were sitting in Valenti's car, which was parked under a streetlight near a city park in Bath Beach, on their first date. They were kissing when a man approached within 3 feet of the passenger side of the car and fired 4 rounds, striking both victims in the head before he escaped into the park. Valenti lost his left eye. Moskowitz, the only blonde victim of Berkowitz, died from her injuries. That night, Detective John Faltico was awakened at home and told to report to the 10th Homicide Division at the 60th Precinct Station House in Coney Island. He was given 2 weeks to work on the Moskowitz and Valenti case as a normal murder investigation. If it could not be solved in that time frame, it was to be given to the Son of Sam task force. Local resident Cecilia Davis was walking her dog at the scene of the Moskowitz-Valenti shooting when she saw patrol officer Michael Cantino ticketing a car that was parked near a fire hydrant. Moments after the traffic police had left, a young man walked past her from the area of the car and seemed to study her with some interest. Davis felt concerned because he was holding some kind of dark object in his hand. She ran to her home, only to hear shots fired behind her in the street. Davis remained silent about this experience for 4 days until she finally contacted the police, who closely checked every car that had been ticketed in the area that night. Berkowitz's yellow 1970 Ford Galaxy was among the cars that they investigated. On August 9, 1977, NYPD Detective James Justice telephoned the Yonkers Police Department to ask them to schedule an interview with Berkowitz. The Yonkers police dispatcher, who first took Justice's call, was Wheat Carr, the daughter of Sam Carr and sister of Berkowitz's alleged cult confederates, John and Michael Carr. As soon as Justice mentioned the name David Berkowitz to Wheat, she said, "Let me tell you about him. I know him. He lives right behind me." She also informed Justice that Berkowitz had shot and wounded their black Labrador retriever named Harvey, and that Harvey was her father Sam's dog. When Justice heard Sam, he had a very good feeling that Berkowitz was the real culprit that they had been looking for. Justice asked Yonkers police for some help tracking down Berkowitz. According to Mike Novatoni, a Yonkers police sergeant, the department had their own suspicions about Berkowitz in connection with strange crimes in their jurisdiction, which were referred to in one of the Son of Sam letters. Yonkers investigators even told Justice that Berkowitz might be the Son of Sam. The following day, on August 10th, the police investigated Berkowitz's car, which was parked outside his apartment building at 35 Pine Street, Yonkers. They saw a gun in the back seat, searched the car, and found a duffel bag filled with ammunition, maps of the crime scenes, and a threatening letter addressed to Inspector Timothy Dowd of the Son of Sam Task Force. Police decided to wait for Berkowitz to leave the apartment rather than risk a violent confrontation in the building's narrow hallway. They also waited to obtain a search warrant for the apartment, worried that their search might be challenged in court. The initial search of the vehicle was based on the handgun that was visible in the back seat, although possession of such a gun was legal in New York State and required no special permit. The warrant still had not arrived when Berkowitz exited the apartment building at about 10 p.m. and entered his car. Detective John Falatico approached the driver's side of the car and pointed his gun close to Berkowitz's temple, while Detective Sergeant William Gardella pointed his gun from the passenger side. A paper bag containing a .44 caliber Bulldog revolver of the type that was identified in ballistic tests was found next to Berkowitz in the car. He then stated flatly, "Well, you got me." As described in Son of Sam by Lawrence Klausner, Faltico remembered the big, inexplicable smile on the man's face. "Now that I've got you," Detective Faltico said to the suspect, "who have I got?" "You know, the man said, and what the detective remembered was a soft, almost sweet voice. "No, I don't. You tell me." The man turned his head and said, "I'm Sam." "You're Sam? Sam who?" "Sam. David Berkowitz." An alternate version claims that Berkowitz's first words were reported to be, "Well, you got me. How come it took you such a long time?" Falotico was officially credited by the NYPD as the arresting officer of the Son of Sam. Police searched Berkowitz's apartment and found it in disarray, with satanic graffiti on the walls. They also found diaries that he had kept since he was age 21, 3 stenographers' notebooks, nearly all full, where Berkowitz meticulously noted hundreds of fires throughout New York City. Berkowitz himself confessed that he was the Phantom of the Bronx, an unidentified individual or individuals responsible for more than 2,000 arsons committed around the city throughout the 1970s. Soon after Berkowitz's arrest, the address of the apartment building was changed from 35 Pine Street to 42 Pine Street in an attempt to end its notoriety. Berkowitz was briefly held in a Yonkers police station before being transported directly to the 60th Precinct in Coney Island, where the Son of Sam task force was located. At about 1 a.m., Mayor Beam arrived to see the suspect personally. After a brief and wordless encounter, he announced to the media, "The people of New York City can rest easy because of the fact that the police have captured a man whom they believe to be the Son of Sam." Berkowitz was interrogated for about 30 minutes in the early morning of August 11th. He quickly confessed to the shootings and expressed an interest in pleading guilty. The investigation was led by John Keenan, who took the confession. During questioning, Berkowitz claimed that his neighbor's dog was one of the reasons that he killed, stating that the dog demanded the blood of pretty young girls. He said that the Sam mentioned in the first letter was his former neighbor Sam Carr, and that Harvey, Carr's black Labrador, was possessed by an ancient demon which issued irresistible commands that Berkowitz kill people. After a few weeks of his capture, Berkowitz was permitted to communicate with the press. In a letter to the New York Post dated September 19, 1977, he alluded to his original story of demonic possession, but closed with a warning that has been interpreted by some investigators as an admission of criminal accomplices. "There are other sons out there. God help the world." At a press conference in February of '79, however, Berkowitz declared that his previous claims of demonic possession were a hoax. Berkowitz later stated in a series of meetings with his special court-appointed psychiatrist that he had long contemplated murder to get revenge on a world that he felt had rejected and hurt him. 3 separate mental health examinations determined that Berkowitz was competent to stand trial. Despite this, defense lawyers advised him to enter a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, but he refused. Berkowitz appeared calm in court on May 8, 1978, as he pled guilty to all of the shootings. At his sentencing 2 weeks later, Berkowitz caused an uproar when he attempted to jump out of a window on the 7th floor courtroom. After he was restrained, he repeatedly chanted, "Stacy was a whore," and shouted, "I'd kill her again, I'd kill them all again." The court ordered another psychiatric examination before sentencing could proceed. During the evaluation, Berkowitz drew a sketch of a jailed man surrounded by numerous walls. At the bottom he wrote, "I am not well at all." Nonetheless, Berkowitz was again found competent to stand trial. On June 12, 1978, David Berkowitz was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison for each murder, to be served consecutively. He was ordered to serve time in Attica Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison in upstate New York. Despite prosecutors' objections, the term of Berkowitz's guilty plea made him eligible for parole in 25 years. After his arrest, Berkowitz was initially confined to a psychiatric ward in Kings County Hospital, where the staff reported that he seemed remarkably troubled by his new environment. On the day after his sentencing, he was taken first to Sing Sing Prison, then to the upstate Clinton Correctional Facility for psychiatric and physical examinations. 2 more months were spent at the Central New York Psychiatric Center in Marcy before his admission to Attica Prison. Berkowitz served about a decade in Attica until he was relocated to Sullivan Correctional Facility in Fallsburg, where he remained for many years. Later, he was transferred to Shawangunk Correctional Facility in Ulster County. Berkowitz described his life in Attica as a nightmare. In 1979, there was an attempt on Berkowitz's life in which the left side of his neck was slashed from front to back, resulting in a wound that required more than 50 stitches to close. Berkowitz refused to identify his assailant and claimed only that he was grateful for the attack. It brought a sense of justice, or, in Berkowitz's own words, the punishment I deserve. It's definitely an interesting story. I know that I learned quite a few new things about Son of Sam. But that is going to do it for today. Thank you everyone for listening, and I hope that you enjoyed the story. If so, could you please rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts? A 5-star rating really helps others to find the show. Don't forget to join us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe on YouTube. Once again, thank you everyone for listening, and make sure to keep those doors and windows locked, and stay ready for Ohio Unsolved.